February 8th, 1984. The eyes of the world turned to Sarajevo. Under clear winter skies, 49 nations unite in celebration. Cold War's raging, but here? Everyone's together, laughing, united under those mountains. Feels like the world's actually figuring it out for a second. But just few years later, that same city becomes a battleground. Snipers perch on hillsides, mortars rain from the mountains, and 11,000 souls perish in the longest siege in modern history. This is the Siege of Sarajevo. In 1984, Sarajevo was a city between worlds. It lay in a valley surrounded by the Dinaric Alps, where mosques, churches, and synagogues stood within walking distance of each other. Ottoman courtyards met Austro-Hungarian facades, and the scent of coffee drifted through narrow streets paved centuries earlier. The city was young at heart. Half its population was under 30. Students filled cafes, artists debated politics, and musicians mixed Western rock with Balkan folk. Sarajevo was confident, modern, secular, and proud of its diversity. That February, it welcomed the world. The Winter Olympics opened with 49 nations and thousands of spectators. It was the first time a socialist country had hosted the Winter Games. The event was organized with precision and warmth, surprising even Western journalists. For 2 weeks, Sarajevo was flexing its unity, East and West meeting peacefully on neutral ground. Sarajevo shone that winter. It was open and full of promise. No one imagined how fragile that promise really was. For decades, Yugoslavia stood as an exception in the communist world. It wasn't part of the Soviet bloc, nor entirely aligned with the West. Under President Josip Broz Tito, it charted its own course, socialist in economy, but open in culture and trade. 6 republics formed the federation: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, and Macedonia. They spoke similar languages, but carried centuries of different religions and identities. Tito held them together through a mix of authority and charisma. His slogan was simple: brotherhood and unity. When Tito died in 1980, the glue began to crack. The federal government weakened, and power drifted toward the republics. Without a central figure to balance ambition and fear, nationalism started to rise. At first, it was quiet, just speeches, flags, and new political parties. But behind it lay resentment built over decades. By the late 1980s, Yugoslavia's economy was collapsing. As unemployment skyrocketed, the blame game became the national sport. Serbia pointed the finger at Slovenia and Croatia, accusing them of acting purely in their own interests. They, in turn, accused Belgrade of clinging to centralized control. Then came the politicians who knew how to turn crisis into power. In Serbia, Slobodan Milosevic made a singular promise. He would be the defender of every Serb, no matter where they lived. In Croatia, Franjo Tudjman responded with a vision of national revival, a return to independent statehood. The language shifted. The old rhetoric of unity was discarded, replaced entirely by appeals to identity. Bosnia and Herzegovina stood in the middle, geographically, politically, and ethnically. Its population was deeply mixed: Bosniaks, Serbs, and Croats living side by side. Sarajevo itself was the symbol of that coexistence. It was, in a very real sense, the Jerusalem of Europe. But as the Union crumbled, every group saw a different future for Bosnia. For some, independence meant freedom. For others, it meant betrayal.
Ovo je put na koji vi hoćete da izvedete Bosnu i Hercegovinu, ista ona autostrada pakla i stradanja kojom su pošli Slovenija i Hrvatska. Nemojte da mislite da nećete odvesti Bosnu i Hercegovinu u pakao, a muslimanski narod možda u nestanak. Jer muslimanski narod ne može da se odbrani ako bude rat ovdje.
Ovo što se radi danas, ovo ne služi na čast srpskog narodu. Ni ovaj način istupanja i ove prijetnje koje se iskazuju. Muslimanski narod neće nestati. To ja poručujem gospodinu Karadžiću.
As the Yugoslav Federation disintegrated, Sarajevo once again found itself at the center of history, this time not as an Olympic host, but as the next battleground. Spring came early to Sarajevo in 1992. As March turned to April, the city's residents were anxious but hopeful that war might somehow pass them by. News had spread of brutal fighting in Croatia and ethnic clashes in Bosnian towns, yet in Sarajevo, the trams still ran and cafes still opened each morning. Many Sarajevans clung to the hope that their cosmopolitan capital would remain a safe haven of peace. On April 5th, that hope was put to the test. Since the referendum, tensions in the city had been escalating. Barricades and roadblocks went up as Serb paramilitaries loyal to Radovan Karadzic took positions in the hills and some neighborhoods. In response, tens of thousands of Sarajevans, Bosniaks, Croats, Serbs, and others together, flooded the streets on April 5th to march for peace. It was a spontaneous, defiant demonstration of unity. The crowd marched to the parliament, holding banners with a single message. They wanted to work and live together. As the mass of unarmed people pressed on, Serb nationalists nervously watched from the sidelines. Then, near the parliament, gunshots cracked through the air. From the upper floors of the Holiday Inn Hotel, a building that, in a cruel twist of fate, had housed Olympic guests, snipers opened fire on the crowd. Panic erupted. Protesters screamed and scattered for cover, and 2 women fell lifeless to the pavement. They would be remembered as the first civilian victims of the siege. In fact, several people were killed in that volley of gunfire and dozens wounded, shattering any illusion that Sarajevo might be spared. By nightfall on April 5th, the city was convulsing with violence. Gun battles at barricades, buildings set aflame, and the long agony of Sarajevo had begun. Within days, Sarajevo was surrounded. Bosnian Serb forces, units of the Yugoslav People's Army and local Serb militias, seized the high ground in nearly all directions. Sarajevo was quickly surrounded. Roads were blocked, utilities cut, and heavy weapons aimed at the city. Phones went dead. Power vanished. In days, 300,000 people were sealed in. The capital of newly independent Bosnia turned into a city under siege. Inside the besieged city, chaos and resolve mixed in equal measure. The newly formed Bosnian government in Sarajevo had few resources to mount a defense. There was no organized Bosnian army yet, just hastily assembled units of police officers, territorial defense reservists, and civilian volunteers. Young men who had been students a week earlier now stood behind sandbag barricades with hunting rifles or old AK-47s, and neighborhoods formed their own watch teams. They piled scrap cars, buses, and furniture at intersections to block sniper lines of sight. Checkpoints sprung up at street corners, manned by locals who weren't sure if they were defending a street or an entire country. In those early days, the city's defenders were badly outgunned and disorganized, yet they held the city center, and they had no choice but to fight or die. Meanwhile, not far away, many ordinary Serbians recoiled at what was being done in their name. In Serbia, thousands of people took to the streets in anti-war protests in 1991 and 1992. In Belgrade and other Serbian cities, crowds of brave citizens chanted slogans like, "Not in our name," and "Stop the war." Serbian artists, rock musicians, and intellectuals spoke out against the rising tide of nationalism, even as Milosevic's regime censored media and dispatched police to break up rallies. It's estimated that between 50,000 and 200,000 people deserted from the Yugoslav People's Army, and another 100,000 to 150,000 emigrated from Serbia to avoid participating in the war. Back in besieged Sarajevo, daily life collapsed fast. Electricity failed and water stopped. Serb forces took control of reservoirs, leaving people to line up at springs under sniper fire. Some were shot while collecting water. Others melted snow or gathered rain. In a city once known for its fountains, clean water became a daily risk. Every home had to adapt to survive. Those who lived above the first floor often moved downstairs or into basements at night because sniper bullets and shrapnel easily pierced the upper floor walls. Windows were crisscrossed with tape or boarded up with wood and blankets, partly to cushion explosions and partly to block the light from snipers' views. Apartments became dark bunkers with mattresses against the walls. Heat was another major problem. The gas lines were cut and winter temperatures plunged below freezing in Sarajevo. With no gas or electricity for heat, people burned anything that would catch fire. Furniture, books, even park trees and parquet flooring were fed into makeshift stoves. From the hills, the besiegers began a cruel daily rhythm of bombardment. In the first weeks of the siege, hundreds of shells a day pounded Sarajevo's neighborhoods. No part of the city was truly safe. The main boulevard, that once served as a proud Olympic transportation route, earned a new nickname, Sniper Alley. To get from one part of town to another, civilians learned to sprint between cover, zigzagging from one wrecked car to the next. Strangers would stand at intersections, motioning when it was clear to run. In 1992, Sarajevo's only thread connecting it to the outside world was its airport, though cruelly, it was a lifeline that most people couldn't actually use. That June, the United Nations stepped in, negotiated control of the airport, and reopened it for humanitarian aid. Planes marked with the UN logo began flying in supplies, mostly food and medicine, and occasionally flew out a few of the wounded. But the airport itself sat in a vulnerable spot, a flat expanse southwest of the city, ringed by Serb forces. Civilians weren't allowed to evacuate by plane. Instead, some took their chances on foot. Under the cover of darkness, they'd make a break for it, running across the open runway in hopes of reaching Bosnian-held ground on the other side. It was an act of desperation, and one that often ended in tragedy. In the early months, foreign journalists arrived in Sarajevo, some by UN flights, others overland. Many stayed at the Holiday Inn, the same building where shots were first fired on demonstrators. It became the press center. From there, they showed the world a modern city surrounded and hit daily, with civilians trapped and streets turned to ruins. The images drew sympathy, but little action. The UN sent peacekeepers, but their orders were limited. They observed, but couldn't intervene. To many in Sarajevo, they seemed more like witnesses than defenders. By late spring 1992, the city was sealed. No power, little food, no escape, and no real help coming. By the summer of 1992, Sarajevo had slipped into a brutal routine, the business of staying alive. Power outages were the norm, and people adapted by charging radios at odd hours, listening to broadcasts for vital updates on aid, water, or the dead.